Hey guys, welcome to historical episode number 34 of Ask DeFranco's Gym. Those who don't know me, I grew up, 34 is my favorite number, so I'm like a little kid, brings me back to my Pee-wee football days and my idols growing up. So in honor of them, this episode will be in honor of them, guys like Bo Jackson, Earl Campbell, and of course the late great sweetness, Walter Payton. And in honor of them, I will answer a question. I picked a football question in honor of my favorite number 34s. So, Chris writes, Joe, I have a two-part question for you. I know your feelings on the 300-yard shuttle, gassers, and the 16 110s test, but do you feel they have any place during the early stages of the off-season for a football player when you're building their base? Can these be considered foundational speed drills because they are run at sub-max speeds? Yes, they are run at sub-max speeds, but no, they shouldn't be or can't be a foundational drill, or they don't build a base because the bioenergetic demands of football is completely opposite from what they are training. In other words, it's like comparing apples to oranges. Basically, we've talked about it time and time again. If you have our speed DVD and manual, you know that football is an alactic sport. All those tests require an efficient lactic system, or they measure your lactic system. It's a test of your lactic development, not so much, or not at all, your alactic development. So something, again, you're comparing apples to oranges. One has nothing to do with the other, so that does not make for a great foundational tool, or it doesn't build a good base. It basically has nothing to do with it. So no, it's like if I have a kid that if one of my kids doesn't like eating broccoli, and I really want them to develop an acquired taste for eating their greens, and I just want to kind of get them used to eating their greens, serving them ice cream every night isn't the best way to do that. It actually has nothing to do with it. And it's probably the worst example ever, but you get my point. One has nothing to do with the other, so no, it does not build a good base. Football is a sport of repeated accelerations, doing tests that take anywhere from 16 seconds to over a minute will not help build a base for a sport that requires 5 to 7 second repeated bursts. And so I'm not angry at you, I just get fired up when I talk about this stuff. All right, then the second part of your question. I just purchased your 12 Years, 12 Epic Workouts ebook and I loved it. But it got me thinking, is there anything you're doing now with your players that you weren't doing 12 years ago? Any major changes that come to your mind? Thanks, Coach. First of all, I would say the soft tissue work and kind of self-maintenance and self-care is definitely a bigger part of my program. I've always been into just general flexibility and mobility, and we always warmed up properly. That's not an aspect of programming that I really ever neglected. In my own training I did, but once I became a so-called professional, those are things I always addressed. But I think tools like the lacrosse ball, foam rollers, the Theracane, the stick, those type of implements, especially the lacrosse ball and the foam roller, has become as common as barbells and dumbbells in my gym and in my programming. So those things are foundational now. We use them much more because positioning is everything. Whether you're on the athletic field or in the weight room or on the track, you need to achieve certain positions in order to perform just basic fundamental movement patterns. So it doesn't matter how great your program is on paper, if you can't get an athlete to have the minimum mobility required to do a half decent squat or lunge or sprint with semi-decent technique, it doesn't matter how good your program is on paper, it's going to be a disaster when you implement it. So that's definitely one thing that pops into my head. Another thing is probably training aerobically for my football players. That is something I was I always neglected and was told that the top coaches I went to, all the seminars I was going to back in the day, all my books and my notebooks I now have here at my office in New Jersey, and I have notebooks from coaches, well-respected coaches that say having an aerobic base does absolutely nothing to help you recover from anaerobic activities. So I was always of that mindset, and that's just always the way I trained. It was engraved in my brain that if you do anything aerobic, you're going to lose muscle and you're going to waste away. And, research has come out now, and we have experimented too, and, nothing could be further from the truth. Having an efficient aerobic system definitely helps kind of rebuild in between sets of anaerobic activities. So a sport like football, yes, it's a bunch of repeated bouts of explosive sprints and jumps and tackling, but while you're resting, that 35 seconds, while you walk back to the huddle, walk back to the line of scrimmage, jog off the field in preparation for the next play, it's the aerobic system that's really helping your anaerobic system recover. And if you have a poorly developed aerobic system, will hinder your anaerobic system. So basically, it's going to take you longer for your anaerobic system to be capable of repeating those explosive activities that are required on the athletic field. So we definitely incorporate more aerobic training into my programming. I don't overdo it. I know since, this has become the new thing, and I feel like you have some guys that train football players and their whole program revolves around aerobic development and tempo runs, and they totally neglect and they downplay strength and power and the alactic capacity type work. So I haven't overreacted to it, but it's definitely addressed, incorporated into our programming. The one thing I do want to say is that aerobic training does not have to be long, slow, long duration, steady state type activities. It doesn't mean you're going for a 5-mile jog. That we do not do any of. If it's an interval type of sport like football, we will train aerobically in interval fashion. So you could do a tempo run where you run 40 or 60 yards at, say, 60 to 65% of your max velocity, and then you do some sort of active recovery for 30 or 40 seconds, things like band pull-aparts or crunches, something easy, and then you perform your next tempo run. We do it a lot with prowler as well. Just put a 45 or maybe a 25 on each side of the prowler, push the prowler 30, 40 yards at about 60%, do some active recovery for 30 to 40 seconds, then push the prowler back. And so you're working in that type interval fashion. You could do that for a required number of sets and reps, or you could just do it for a specific duration of time. As long as your heart rate is staying in the aerobic zone, you're fine and you're training aerobically. So don't be going out for these long jogs either. I would recommend you do most of your aerobic development in circuit style fashion for athletes that are interval type athletes like football. Then finally, I would say the one other thing that pops into my head, and really that's it, would be we definitely incorporate more eccentrics and isometrics into our programming. Eccentrics are something I've always done. I've always incorporated isometric holds from, back when I was in 7th grade training for my dad. My dad used to make me hold positions for he would go out to lunch, I'd still be holding weights. So the isometric hold has been around for a long time in my family, but not consistently really once I started training athletes. And Cal Dietz's book, Triphasic Training, definitely influenced me and kind of lit a little bit of a spark to look into it a little more. And anybody who bought our Built to Last ebook saw the influence of incorporating that type of training, the eccentrics and isometrics, into our accessory work, and it worked incredibly well for injury prevention, strength, size, speed. So I am a big fan. You will notice the influence in version 4 of my West Side for Skinny Bastards program, which is coming out this month, Strong Bastard 911, which is only a few short weeks away. The program's phenomenal. Probably the best program in general I've ever done. I love the style of training. It's like I feel like I'm coming back home with the West Side for Skinny Bastard type template, but a couple changes. One of those major changes is incorporating more eccentrics and isometrics. So you'll see how it has influenced me right up until this point. So those are some of the changes over the last 12 years. Hopefully that helped. You got to be a lifelong student. Once you think you know it all, you know nothing. Hopefully this helped you out. Thank you for joining me on Epic episode number 34, and I will see you guys next week for episode number 35 of Ask DeFranco's Gym.